Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/malicious compliance, where people follow orders to the letter to spite someone, and the stories are hilarious. And in today's episode, we've got people ruining their own lives, a nasty Karen coworker who tried to get OP fired gone wrong, and OP teaches a business owner a lesson they will never forget. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Several years ago, I worked as a local delivery driver for a steel processing plant. We would take stock units of plate and structural steel and process them into parts our customers could use. Some processes, such as painting, would go to a third-party vendor and then come back to us for shipment to the customer. I worked on a set routine. I would deliver to the paint shop in the morning and bring back the orders painted the day before. While that trailer was being unloaded, I would hook up another trailer and deliver finished orders to a customer 70 miles away from the shop. Now, this delivery had a hard appointment time of 2 p.m., and I could not miss it. When I returned after making that delivery, I would finish the day with short deliveries or pickups as needed, and then go home. It was an easy, stress-free job as long as I stuck to the routine and made my appointments on time. Communication between departments was often poor though, and it disrupted the entire process. Enter my main antagonist and one of the production supervisors. The guy was arrogant and condescending with everyone, but he took a special dislike towards me because I wasn't in his chain of command, and I would not bend over backwards to accommodate his wants. I was constantly butting heads with him because he forever tried to hold up my truck for last-second add-ons. Now, this wouldn't have been a big deal, except that they always interfered with my 2 p.m. delivery, the one I had to be on time for. I kept explaining that I could do his errands in the mornings or afternoons, but he couldn't mess with the middle of my day. It didn't help that my direct superior was a tame little man that avoided conflict at any cost. Which means I end up taking a lot of heat from this production supervisor, even though he couldn't really punish me for meeting my other work obligations. Things finally came to a head when the superior comes up to shipping with a large order that needed to go to paint. I was about to leave for my 2 p.m. customer and I told him so, but I had room left on the truck. So I told him if he wanted to load his parts on, I would deliver them on my way back from my primary delivery. But this wasn't good enough for him. He told me these parts were behind schedule and they had to get painted immediately. If I delivered them in the afternoon, they wouldn't get painted until the following day, which would put him further behind. To top it off, this order required a special marine-grade paint that had been mistakenly delivered to our company location instead of the paint shop, and it all needed to go as soon as possible. We began our usual back and forth. I told him that I had a delivery appointment, that I could do what he wanted, but I couldn't do it on his schedule. After a heated conversation where he devolved into rudeness and name-calling and telling me I shouldn't have a job here, he said, "Fine, I'll take it myself in the other truck." Now, in addition to the tractor trailer I drove, we had another delivery truck on hand for occasional use. Well, the supervisor decides to drive it on the down low, loading it up and heading out without telling our shipping department. And this would have been a grand idea, but driving either truck requires a commercial driver's license, which the supervisor did not have. I pointed this out to him and told him he doesn't have the requirements and certs to do this, to which he replied that he was only going up the road and everything would be fine. Again, I tried to point out that he didn't have a hazardous materials endorsement to transport the paint. And again, he told me I'm just going up the road, idiot, and that I need to shut the heck up and write him out directions to the paint shop and get out of the way since I was effing useless anyways. So I did just that, and I wrote him out a perfect set of turn-by-turn directions. And how was that malicious compliance, you might ask? Well, this paint shop was about 30 miles up the road. And here's the thing. I knew, and he didn't, that 15 miles up the road was a DOT way station that always had at least 2 state troopers inside. And at least one of them was a commercial enforcement officer. Also, the truck this supervisor wanted to drive wasn't equipped with an easy pass transponder, which would allow him to bypass the scale. And I knew, given his ignorance, that he wouldn't know that he was required to pull in. I figured that he would blow right past it, and that one of those troopers would put down his coffee long enough to chase him down to find out why. And to my great delight, this is exactly what happened. The troopers saw him drive past, and they pulled him over. They then escort him back to the weigh station for a thorough inspection. And for those unfamiliar, the transportation industry is highly regulated. Some might say it's over-regulated, but anyone that makes it a career knows it's best to follow the laws, or face some serious consequences. The supervisor didn't know any of this, and he was like a lamb going to the slaughter. The DOT inspector ripped him to pieces, and he was in deep trouble. Among the biggest infractions, he was cited for 1. No commercial driver's license, which is a $2,500 fine and up to $10,000 to the company. Misdemeanor charges, 90-day suspended driver's license. Number 2. No hazmat endorsement and no documenting paperwork for the hazmat. No placards identifying the vehicle as carrying hazardous material. That's a $50,000 fine to the company. More if it results in injury, illness, or death to another person. As a bonus, when the trooper escorts him back to the weigh station, the scale master saw him talking on his cell phone. The dude was making a panic call to the company manager, and using a handheld device is also a big no-no. That's another $2,500 fine, $10,000 to $11,000 to the company. The truck was put out of service at the weigh station until it had the proper bill of lading, hazmat paperwork, and a driver with a valid license. The supervisor wasn't allowed to leave himself until someone came to get him. Needless to say, the guy lost his job immediately. I suspected that would happen, so I hung around the shipping office after my delivery. I got to witness his walk of shame as he was escorted out of the building. I was never officially told how much his fines were, but an educated guess puts it at thousands to him personally, and potentially close to $100,000 to the company. I do know that the company tried to sue him in civil court to recoup their losses, although I don't know the outcome to that. The best part, though, was that after months of watching him swagger around wearing a big hubris cowboy hat, I was the one that got to swat it off his head. Oh my goodness, guys, the fallout of that was way more than I expected. Not only did the guy lose his job on the spot, but those infractions, those are some pretty steep fines. But hey, the guy totally deserved it, right? After giving OP such a hard time, when OP tried to tell him multiple times, just don't take it. And this person comments, I've been married to a trucker for 10 years. The second I read that the super got into the truck, I laughed so hard that I cried. So I work at a hospital that doubles as a research institution. Since I'm on the research side, I have to involve a lot of other departments. And most people with whom I work with are very chill, and they understand that I have to beseech them for things to do my job. I'm one of those she can go 100 hectares on a single tank of kerosene type of people. And I'm very on top of things, for which my coworkers value me. However, the one place that camaraderie breaks down is with some of the nurses who work in my specific clinic. Honestly, I'd say my relationship with most nurses is great. I bring them homemade treats sometimes, and I'm always extra friendly, and I try my best to get along with them. Some of them have their days regardless, and I put up with them. With that said, right after I first started working in that specific clinic, unfortunately, one nurse in particular, who we'll call Karen, decided I was on her blacklist. And the thing is, she hates doing work. She'll moan, she'll groan, and if she helps at all, it's with angsty indignation. So one morning, I need a series of blood tubes drawn in a clinic for a patient, and Karen was the only nurse available. She was extremely put off at my asking her to draw this protocol kit, despite me giving advance notice to the clinic that this needed to be done. Karen clearly did not want to leave her computer, which was not open to anything work-related. But she begrudgingly went and drew the tubes. She was then profusely thanked by me for just doing her damn job. I come back down later to get a prescription signed for another patient, and a different nurse asked what I'd done to upset Karen, because apparently she's been going off about me to anyone who would listen. I explained what happened. The other nurse informed me that Karen was pissed at me, and also felt that my outfit, a white medical coat, a modest blouse, work pants, and high-heeled boots, was way too provocative. I was shocked, and I decided to let it go and try to avoid Karen as much as possible, and this did not work. I kept running into situations where other nurses were busy seeing patients. I was forced to walk back into the nurse triage room, which is off limits to patients, and ask Karen to draw 2 more of these blood kits the next month. And the thing is, she was never happy to see me, and she was always wasting time on her work computer when I entered the room. Maybe 2 or 3 days after the last kit draw, my supervisor calls me into her office to discuss my presentation. She then very nicely, and with pity in her voice, told me that she'd received a report about my dress habits in the patient-facing spaces. She said she personally hadn't noticed anything, but was obligated to discuss this with me anyhow. I assured her I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought about confronting Karen, but I decided not to because, loose cannon and whatnot. So after a brief reminder of the dress code, I figured that at least it was over. It was not over. 2 weeks later, and I hadn't even asked anyone to draw any kits in the interim, a formal report was filed against me for my conduct in the clinic. This went to the hospital, and then my supervisor, who even after reading the report, seemed totally clueless about what it could mean. I explained what had been happening with Karen. But then my supervisor told me a second person reported this as well, on the same day as who was obviously Karen. This time, it was a patient. The patient had reported that I was dressing inappropriately for a patient-facing environment, and then demanded I be reprimanded immediately. And I'm thinking, whoa. I asserted that I wasn't, but I was nonetheless put on probation, which meant that my supervisor, against her will, now had to come with me when I saw patients in clinic for the foreseeable future. And also, a nurse manager would have to accompany both of us when she was free, since I was dressing provocatively in patient-facing spaces, and that was her domain. But as you can likely guess from her browsing habits, Karen was not the sort of person who needed more supervisors in her area. Cue the malicious compliance. I'm thinking, if you want to punish me and force me to work in the eyesight of supervisors, alright, let's get some supervisors down here as quickly as possible. My next in-clinic patient came in 2 days, and it was one of those stupid timed in-clinic protocol kit visits, which meant I was forced to ask one of the nurses to draw the patient's blood. I informed my supervisor, and we set off for the clinic. The nurse manager was in that day, so she accompanied the 2 of us. We all went back to the triage room so I could ask for help with the blood draw. Karen and the other nurse was there. What we saw upon entering was the other nurse was entering vital signs for a patient into our health database, and Karen was sitting at her desk with an online clothing retailer open on one monitor and Facebook on the other. I asked for Karen's help drawing the kit. When she heard my voice, she sighed heavily, and she spun around and said, "What?" only to see 2 higher-ups looking on with disdain at her work computer. In embarrassment, she swivels back and she closed those 2 tabs, which then revealed, and you can't make this stuff up, a website for marital aids that had been open in another tab, about which she had clearly forgotten until now. I just smiled, hand her the bag like nothing happened. In the hall, my supervisor and the nurse manager were talking about her display just now. Apparently, she had been previously warned about goofing off at work. The nurse manager told the supervisor that she was going to check all of Karen's work computer activity, which I actually didn't know any supervisor could access. And what followed was so incredibly beautiful that I hope it made the ending of this long post worth waiting for. So according to the nurse, who had initially asked me what I'd done to upset Karen, her activity was searched. She was revealed to have been spending hours upon hours every day browsing the web, shopping, and using social media. She had been previously warned about this behavior, and she was given a formal write-up. But this was just the beginning. The day after the 3 of us went to the clinic, my supervisor calls me into her office again. She told me that Karen had fabricated the patient complaint about me, and she posted it from her work computer. And how did they learn this, you might ask? Oh, that's because she saved a draft of the message that reported me to the hospital. My supervisor sincerely apologized for the hassle and told me I was no longer on probation. As for Karen, well, apparently fearing the worst, she puts in her 2-week notice the same day after getting wind that she was in some far more serious trouble. And for reasons that I'll never understand as long as I live, the hospital chose to let her quit after 2 weeks, instead of firing her on the spot. On Karen's last day, I ventured down to the triage room to retrieve some outside records from their printer. When I entered, Karen was alone and she was browsing Glassdoor. I then unbuttoned my white coat, and I told her, "Hey, good luck with your next job. I hope the employees are less provocative." She slowly spun around with a scowl on her face. I just left the room, and I never saw her again. Talk about a plan backfiring horribly, guys. And this is a great example of karma coming back full force on her. And also, here's a tip. If you're ever planning on fabricating a patient complaint, do not do it from your work computer. Or if you choose to do it, at least delete the damn draft, right? Oh my goodness, guys, if you think what that Karen did was dumb, this person shares a similar experience. This person comments, "I had a much less dramatic but similar thing happen. I was like 20, and I was hired to be a unit clerk at a local hospital. They were transitioning from paper to computer. And yes, I'm old. And I was hired specifically because I knew how to use a computer. It was the late 90s. Well, there was a woman there who was so much like Mimi from the Drew Carey Show that I thought the character was based on her. Thick makeup, strong perfume, tons of jewelry, and an absolutely horrible person. She was very angry that the hospital was transitioning to computer because she had worked there for decades and she didn't want to have to learn new things. Because I knew how to use a computer and I was new, she hated me. The woman kept reporting me for random stuff that didn't happen, and she turned the aides and some of the nurses against me. Like, when I got pregnant with my son, she told everyone I didn't know who the father was. When I was 5 months pregnant, she told the supervisor that I threatened to jump one of the aides in the parking lot. Anyways, it came to a head when the supervisor received a patient complaint that I wore so much perfume it triggers his allergies. And here's 2 problems with that. 1, I don't wear perfume. And more importantly, I didn't work the date he stated this happened. Because it didn't, of course. It was Mimi, and she had worn a ton of perfume as she always did. She then saw a patient's family leave a complaint form. She opened the complaint form box and she put my name in place of her own, but she didn't think to change the date to one on which I'd actually worked. And we know this because security cameras. The box was located between the supervisor's office and the unit clerk's desk, where a huge amount of patient information sits, so there was security cameras. She was fired after 40 years of working there. It was such a shame and such a stupid way to lose a job, especially because I was put on bed rest when I was 6 months pregnant. If she had waited 2 more weeks, she wouldn't have to ever work with me again. Okay. So before we begin, let's get the background over with. I worked as care staff for a private company that deals with special needs individuals. We have day hab facilities and group homes. In a prior job, I did the same for the state, but I was moved to an IT role after a while until the stupid boss from upper management became too great, which was a whole other story. Before that, I was an EMT, and before that, I was in the army, and I know how to cover my own ass. Backstory complete. So recently, my boss sent out an email to all staff, and we had an in-person company meeting because I put on a form that the state inspectors look at that said, "Client returned from day trip sunburned, disoriented, and dehydrated. Staff with the client reported they passed out. Apparent heat exhaustion. Reported to the RN and state authority for possible neglect." Apparently, the RN never looked at the report before the state auditors came in a week later, although she did look at the client and she agreed with me about the heat exhaustion. Fast forward 9 days and we have this emergency company meeting. The boss hands out a paper specifically telling every staff member that they're not to do anything outside the scope of their job description, and that they're not doctors, while staring right at me the whole time. She calls me out specifically during the meeting by name, and I'm thinking, alright, fine, I stopped doing anything but the exact wording of my original hiring duties. 2 months pass, and I get a call about a problem with the computers at the main office in San Antonio. My job is an hour away. Now, I'd traditionally done all the IT troubleshooting, as I was one of the first hires of the company, and I had a background for it. Boss calls me on my day off and asks me to drive to the main office and fix their computer system. And this is when I said to her, I can't do anything outside my listed duties, per your order. I then hang up and turn the phone off until dinner. After I turn the phone back on, I get a call within 10 minutes from the company owner. He, who had been nothing but nice to me up until now, just bluntly asked when I felt like doing my job and getting things working, but especially payroll. Don't I want to get paid tomorrow? Get your ass in gear. Now, that may indeed have been the wrong way to start the conversation with someone who wasn't being paid extra for their IT problems. So I refer him to the email and in-person letter the boss put out, and then I pointed out how the company policy had a no firearms rule, but that he specifically always carried one to all company meetings and events on his right hip, calling it out by model as a Kimber 4. I then politely advised him to find a new way to deal with his own problems, as the computers being bricked wasn't one of mine, but paying employees such as me was one of his, per state and federal law, and then hung up. I turned my phone off again until I was at work 2 days later. In that time, apparently 3 people had quit from failing to be paid, and 18 more were threatening to, and the owner had driven over to have a chat with boss and myself. They laid out that as senior care staff, my job role had expanded over the years I was there, 5 at this point, and I countered that the pay hadn't at all since I'd been hired. My doing IT work was a charity from me, not a job requirement, and I appreciated none of the disrespect I had gotten lately from either of them. I also pointed out that I knew full well that a contract IT company would cost them at least hundreds, if not thousands, for a consult, and at least $200 an hour, and if I deigned to fix their problem, it would take about 3 hours. The owner offered me a 50-cent raise and 3 hours overtime. I countered with a public apology in front of all staff from my boss. Also, a $3 an hour raise and an exemption from the no carry firearm policy that he was being hypocritical about. They said no. So I said I'll be in the back with the clients doing my job duties and to let me know when they contacted an IT company and changed their minds. Keep in mind that all the computer systems were effectively bricked at this point, so the nurses can't do charting, no one can bill time for casework, and the state paperwork, while largely paper, can't be sent. It was pretty bad. It took them 4 days, with who knows how many calls to computer specialists for quotes, and another 8 quitting employees to agree to my conditions. That's after 4 tries to get me to let go of the concealed carry one. That was their sticking point. And here's the thing. I don't carry a gun at work. I never have. Even though in my state, it's totally legal. But it just bugged me, the absolute hypocrisy of the owner. So I would have given up the raise before that. In the end, it turns out that the owner's wife deleted something she shouldn't have had access to. And it took all of 8 minutes to restore them from backups. Honestly, forget all the computer stuff. That was such a crappy workplace. Like, was OP seriously called out for doing something they were supposed to do? Like, they made a mandatory report that was a part of their job duties, and they got picked on for it. Like, forget fixing the computers at that point. Leave that place to burn to the ground. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance, another one where horrible bosses are getting ruined yet again. So if you enjoyed this one, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.